I think almost everyone starts calisthenics completely incorrectly, and what actually happens is they not only see shit progress and their results plateau, they might get a little bit of growth at the start and then it just starts to steadily decline, but they actually end up completely stopping calisthenics altogether. And it may be why that you've started here and there and you keep coming back into it, losing growth, losing motivation and coming back in, and it's because you're focusing on the incorrect skills. And what that's doing is not only everything I just mentioned, but it's not setting you up to build strength and to build skill and foundation for later, more advanced skills. So what I highly recommend doing is ticking off these 10 skills in order and adding these into your training until you actually perfect the skill and move on to the next one. And what that's gonna do is, as I said, not only build up the strength and skill needed for later skills, but it's gonna build that gratification and motivation to continue with calisthenics, as you'll not only be progressing faster, but you'll be getting the dopamine high of unlocking skills. So with these 10 skills, I highly recommend, as I said, focusing on them in the order that I've got, but also adding them into your normal training. So these skills aren't just the foundation skills like inverted rows, pull-ups, chest dips, push-ups. If you're a complete beginner, they need to be the core part of your program. You need to be training those twice a week. But for these skills, incrementally add each one into your program and you'll be absolutely flying. And I can explain how you do that towards the end of the video if you need a bit of help. But either way, let's tick off these 10 skills in order. Let's get into it. So the very first one, and everyone's gonna be like, oh, I can already do this exercise. You may be able to do it, but you may not be doing it correctly. So this is just a plank. However, I like to call it the Calisthenics Plank, as what we're trying to do here is we're trying to make sure that we're actually pushing our shoulders down and achieving really good scap retraction. And that's gonna set the tone for absolutely every push exercise you do in calisthenics. So what you wanna focus on doing is almost driving your elbows down and forward into the ground. So you're essentially kind of like you're doing a swoop. And what that's gonna do is it's gonna push your shoulder blades all the way forward and raise your torso up. From that position, you may be in this position, you may be in a little bit of a weird hip position. From there, you also want to focus on crunching your lower abs and squeezing your glutes. You can see the position I'm in here, my hips nice and straight, tilted down, and a nice straight line between my heels and when my upper back starts to round. And if you can hold that for a solid 30 seconds, I think you've really set yourself up to achieve a lot of harder skills. And what that leads to is the next skill, very simple progression, and we're working through to the actual Planche Lean. And I'm sure so many of you have actually heard of this, and a lot of you may already be training it, but you may be doing it incorrectly. And I think a lot of you actually are, to be honest with you. So what you have to make sure you're doing, one, do it off your hands. Hand position, you can see my thumb facing to the top of the room, and you can see my fingers are facing on that 45-degree angle. So that's it there. And that's gonna be very hard, especially, this is a hard skill, guys. So don't feel like, oh, I can already do this. If you can get the Planche Lean right, you set yourself up in calisthenics, I'm not joking. So don't treat this lightly. Don't think you can already do it. That's the hand position there. In terms of shoulder width, about shoulder width, slightly wider is okay. And then from there, obviously getting into the exact same position you had in the plank in terms of pushing those shoulders all the way forward and then hips nice and down. And then you can see from here, what I'm gonna do is obviously lean as far forward as I feel like I can manage with good form. And what you really wanna focus on doing is squeezing your glutes, your lower abs, and then just pushing your shoulders forward. If you are really struggling with that position, I think the best cue that you can think about doing is squeezing your collarbones, pushing your shoulders down, and then your sternum, you wanna imagine that you're like inverting it into your chest. And that's the position. And what you can do is you can literally stand up and then just think about doing it, not on the floor, just think about just pushing your shoulders forward, squeezing your collarbones, shoulders forward and down, as I said, and then inverting that sternum, your chest bone, into your chest. And that's essentially what it's gonna look like. So right now, I'm in the perfect Planche Lean position, obviously under no load, and you should be in the same position. And then what you do is you can literally just go straight down and then get into that same position and then lean further forward. Where you'll feel it isn't always in your shoulders. It's a very isolated movement working your serratus anterior. So yes, your shoulders will be working, putting a lot of load to the wrists, elbows, but it's really about isolating that scap protraction movement. So don't think about trying to lean as far forward as you possibly can, because most of the time you're probably pushing it too hard. Really think about form, technique, scap retraction, and then leaning as far forward as you can with that form and technique. This is definitely an accessory skill. It's not about how hard you can push yourself. It's about building the right movement pattern. Okay, so 2 skills. We've learned the push mechanics. So incredibly important. If you can tick those off and actually have perfect form, you are miles ahead. Absolutely miles ahead, I promise you. So for the next one, now we're trying to build a lot of wrist strength, wrist control, and balance. And this is gonna set the tone for all of the push skills essentially, but it's also handstands as well. And I think this is a great skill that you can tick off in a day, in a week, in a month, depending on where you're at. And this is the crow pose. With the crow pose, the exact same hand position. I want you to get used to being in that position, as it's gonna set the tone for all of your planche exercises as well. So I find getting into that same shoulder width, slightly wider, is great. From here, you wanna think about dropping the elbows down toward you. So down toward you, and then resting your knee on the top of your tricep. You see how you've got 2 heads of the tricep? Everyone's a little bit different, but I find in between those 2 heads where I'll rest my knee, and that works really well. Experiment, we all have different anatomy, so it might feel slightly different towards you, but drop your elbows down, rest your elbows on the top of your tricep, and then I want you to just keep leaning as far forward as you can. Keep leaning forward, try to find that balance, and then you want to try and eventually get one leg off the ground. Keep leaning forward and see if you can lightly tap that other leg off, and see if you can kind of eventually find that position and touch your feet together. And that's that crow pose. What I see wrong a lot, especially with clients that do jump on board, they try and just jump into it. And they'll be trying to do this and they'll fall all the way forward, they'll keep jumping back, and they're just wasting so much time. In terms of the progressions, if you're struggling to find the crow pose, what I recommend doing is just holding a single leg crow pose and just being really light with that leg. And the more time you can spend in that position, the better it's gonna be. And the more you get used to balancing on your hands. So it may take time, but just focus on leaning forward, finding the balance with one leg. If you find you're toppling over and you're just like hitting your head, you're doing this, it's because you may be looking straight down. So if you're looking straight down, that position is kind of putting you toward that way. So what you should be focusing on doing is not looking straight down, look about 1 meter in front of you. You can look 1 meter in front of you. That's gonna really help get into that position and keep your torso upright rather than like this, toppling over forward. If you're struggling with it, just keep training it very slowly, incrementally, lean a bit more forward, use less assistance, but I promise you'll get it very quick. Sometimes you'll be training it for 1 day and then you have a bit of a rest and you come back to it and you can get it. So sometimes it takes a bit of while to facilitate a lot of those learnings, and it's like that with every skill, but just keep at it. So we're seeing a common theme here. The crow pose is now leading us into the next skill. So here's a skill that I think is somewhat underrated. A lot of people say it's completely overrated and it's a shit skill because a lot of people can do it and they kind of show it off. But I think it's an excellent way of learning how to really correctly disperse your weight and balance your weight onto your hands. And what this exercise is, you probably have already guessed it, it's the elbow lever. And what I want you to do, I'll show you the technique for the first part, and then I can show you how you can very, very quickly progress on elbow lever if you can't do it yet. Same thing, hands out to the side in that same planche lean position that you've got, tucking your elbows in the inside of your hip bone. You know you've got those hard hip bones there. You want to tuck your elbows right on the inside of that, on that fleshy part. Hands out to the side a little bit. And then from here, you want to keep leaning further forward until you can raise your legs up into a nice straight line and squeeze your glutes. So that's that elbow lever. If you're struggling to get into it, what I recommend doing is learning the flat frog first. So in the exact same position, in terms of your wrists, in terms of your hands, coming in nice and close here, leaning further forward, and you're just trying to get your legs off in a that kind of frog position. So everything's nice and tucked and trying to find balance there. From that position there, the next progression is a straddle. And this should be a little bit easier. You don't have to lean as far forward, and see if you can kind of get up into that completely straight position in terms of your legs, but obviously just out to the side. If you're struggling with that, what you're probably doing wrong is you're not leaning your elbows forward. So with a flat frog, your elbows can be completely straight over your wrists and you can just balance there. Once you go into a straddle, you can see how my elbows start to shift forward, and then a full elbow lever is even more forward. If you're struggling, if you're just stuck in this position and you can't lift off, it's because you're not shifting that weight forward. So that's what you have to focus on doing. And essentially that's the hardest part of the actual exercise. Just having the strength to do that. So maybe something you have to work on, start with the flat frog, work to the straddle, and eventually get to that elbow lever. Another way to make it a little bit easier is you can see here over to my bed, or I didn't really make it properly, but you can actually make it easier by having some form of way to lean into it. So since I'm off a higher platform, my legs can be a little bit lower and then I can get into it a little bit easier by slightly raising my feet. Probably not the best to do it off the bed, but that's some way you can kind of just help slowly ease into that elbow lever. But I think what everyone gets wrong, they just keep their hands in this position. You do have to push down and brace through that core. So you can tell in the last 4 exercises, what we've been doing is building up the correct pushing mechanics, as well as our wrist strength, control, durability, and all the rest of it. And what that's gonna lead into is obviously a handstand. And the next skill that we're trying to get is a perfect wall handstand. So we're trying to get a perfect wall handstand in terms of perfect alignment. And what I recommend doing is not worrying too much about the kick up yet. Walk yourself back and get yourself on the wall. Make sure that's your environment. You don't want to break your finger on a pot plant in your parents' house. I'm not talking from experience there as well. So yeah, walk yourself up the wall, making sure that you're not going to neck yourself coming up. Come as close as you can to the wall, about a hand length away is great. And then from here, you want to try and push the shoulders down as much as you possibly can. Tense your core, your lower abs, and raise up as high as you can. Obviously, this is actually quite difficult for some people, especially if you don't have the shoulder mobility, the core control. So if you can't get into this position as best as possible, there are regressions that we can focus on. And what that is in terms of the regressions is we can do piked holds. I like to think elevated is great, but you can also do this on the floor as well. So the piked hold is the exact same thing. What we're trying to do is get our hips as high as we possibly can over our wrists, and then lifting ourselves up and holding this position. And that's gonna build up the exact same muscles, the same technique, the same alignment, and just really focus on pushing as down as possibly can. In these handstand variations, what you want to imagine is happening is there is a rope pulling you up from the top of your feet. So it's pulling you up on the top of your feet, you're lifting high, and you're also pushing the ground down as much as possible. And what that's gonna do is just gonna stack all of your joints up collectively in that nice line. For some of you, it's not gonna look like that straight away, and that's completely fine. Come over here, we do have to make sure to actually achieve a really good handstand. Obviously core control, all of that's super important. Usually the biggest limitation isn't always a strength thing, it's a bit of confidence. Being upside down, obviously very pedantic with that. Sorry, very kind of apprehensive for some people, which is fair enough. But what you have to make sure you have is excellent shoulder mobility. And you can see here, my spine is touching the wall here. So every spine is touching the wall. My hips are touching the wall as well. And I'm able to lift my shoulders and hands to the wall. And that is a very difficult level of shoulder flexion. So if you struggle with that, I highly recommend working on your shoulder mobility. I'll add a little circuit. This is something I give to my clients. I'll add a little circuit in the description below. So if you do struggle mobility, highly recommend working on that. Otherwise, progress with those piked holds, elevated piked holds, and eventually get to a point where you can do it off the wall and just keep actively focusing, just pushing the shoulders down as much as you can, lifting the feet up, and you'll get that nice stacked joint alignment. From there, if you feel like you're ready, you can start working on those balancing attempts too, which is obviously super exciting, and using a combination of chest to wall balancing, back to wall balancing, and once you're ready and you're starting to get some decent control pretty consistently against the wall and you're not actually having to use it too much, you can also incorporate some freestanding as well and start learning how to correctly kick up, which is super exciting. A lot of the skills have now led up to this point, and this is learning the pike push-up. And yes, this is probably a little bit more of a strength movement, but I am categorizing it as very much a skill movement because it is very, very technical. And a lot of people think pike push-ups, they think of this. And just go straight up and down and then doing this. And you know what? It's actually a very, very easy exercise. We do not want to be doing that, or at least in calisthenics. We're trying to build the strength specific to handstand push-ups. So the pike push-up is a very difficult exercise when it's done correctly, but we'll talk about how to actually get it right and then how to actually progress to it with easier variations that you guys can work through already now, regardless of your level of strength. So with a pike push-up, we want to try and have our hands about roughly shoulder width apart, a little bit wider, what you typically would with a normal handstand. And then from here, shift our weight onto our toes. So you see how I'm coming onto my toes, and what that's doing is it's bringing my weight forward. So my shoulders are over my wrists, and then we're going to stay on our toes and shift our weight forward, nose to floor, but press up back into a triangle position. So you see I start in a triangle, shift my weight forward, my elbows stay over my wrists, and then I go back into that triangle, and I'm staying on my toes every time. So you go from a triangle, shift forward, come back up. The most important thing that you can think about doing is keeping your elbows tucked and over your wrists. So you're always shifting that weight forward, and staying on your toes is gonna really help that. To do that correctly, fucking very difficult, seriously difficult. But what you can start by doing is obviously simply getting better at push-ups. So making sure you have a really solid push-up foundation. From there, you can start in the typical push-up position you're in, press up into a triangle, and now you're in a bit more of a what do you call it? Like an obtuse triangle, a wider triangle, whatever you want to call it. But from there, you come onto your toes, and then you get into that same movement pattern. You can see the difference there. So now I am pushing up in that pike push-up. And then from the progressions, crawl those feet forward and progress until you can get super piked into this position. You can also use bands to progress. I think that's a great way to add variety. Once you do unlock that pike push-up, the world's your oyster. You'll be doing handstand push-ups pretty quickly, especially with good form. Start to elevate your feet, get to a point where you're at that 90-degree position, and then you can start doing more handstand push-ups. You're absolutely flying. Very important skill to get right. You can also, I didn't mention this, but you can also reduce the range of motion to start with as well. So even if you do start in that piked, you can just do half piked. And a great way to progressively overload is use some form of elevation to place your head on that position and come back, and then obviously incrementally reduce that range. So there's a lot of varieties there to build up this skill, as it is. I honestly think it's one of the most important push exercises in the 10 that you'll learn. I can speak about the pike push-up for hours. I might save it for another video. Let's get into the next one. All right, guys, I've obviously come outside. We need a pull-up bar for this one. And here we are building the essential grip strength, hip flexor strength, and core strength that is going to set the tone for all calisthenics skills, really, and especially all of the pull focus skills. What we're doing here is learning how to hanging leg raise. And if you can unlock a clean, dead straight hanging leg raise with perfect form and get and you're absolutely flying and really set yourself up. Obviously, that does take time to work toward, and eventually you do want to try and get to a compress up super high and even progress to toe taps. But what you want to focus on is just simply doing knee raises to start with. The first progression is just simply doing it with a single leg. And then this is a great way to literally level up and build that capacity. Then you want to obviously progress to knee. Eventually you can get to a point where you're doing kind of like half bent leg raises, and that's a good progression. And then over time, eventually getting completely straight and just focusing on trying to get your feet at the same height of your hips. And if you can progress that even higher and higher, eventually getting to a point where you do toe taps, I think that is absolutely awesome. The most important thing you have to make sure you're doing is you are coming from a complete dead hang. So not contracting everything, elbows completely extended. The only thing that's really working is your forearms and obviously your core and hip flexors to raise up your legs. So don't be trying to do this, because it makes it that little bit easier and it's a different movement. Also, just as important is not using momentum. So you'll see a lot of the time, people do it like this, their hips shift backwards, they're just using momentum and not actually building up that core musculature. You have to make sure your hips are staying in line with that pull-up bar. And the only thing that's moving is obviously your legs forward. And that's using all of your ab musculature and really kind of generating a lot more force with the actual muscles rather than leveraging momentum, which is what we don't want. So the 8th skill, I think this is probably the most exciting and fun skill that everyone in calisthenics should aim to tick off. I think I always call it the gateway drug into calisthenics. And once you unlock this, you set up your whole journey. You're absolutely hooked. And this, for the start, is actually a banded muscle up. And I think a banded muscle up is so important to build, and you will have to have pretty good pull-up strength I would aim for at least 8 to 10 pull-ups before you do start trying to build toward this, and even explosive pull-ups. But with the band and muscle up, I really just want to try and make sure that you can just get over that bar and build up the movement pattern. And what you'll focus on doing is having that nice swing forward. I'm not going to go into crazy amount of detail. I do have a muscle up tutorial that you're more than welcome to click, but always just focus on swinging about that 1 meter in front of you, finding an imaginary line to tap, and then you focus on swinging forward, using a bit of knee momentum, and then getting yourself up. To start with, you're absolutely more than welcome to use as much kipping in terms of your knee as you can, or as heavy enough bands. And then just focus on improving the form over time, reducing the bands down until you can essentially do that muscle up. Just make sure that you're not doing any chicken wing bullshit. Just make sure those shoulders go up linearly. Use a heavy band, unlock that band and muscle up, keep working on it, and you've ticked off a really solid foundation of skills to set you up toward obviously a very clean muscle up. So now, obviously, we're building up a lot of pull strength here, and this is a continuation of those hanging leg raises that we're working on. And this is an excellent variation and something that all you guys probably do want to eventually unlock, and it's a front lever. Obviously, we're not going to be able to just jump straight into a front lever in our first year. So what we have to focus on is the progressions. And if you can get to a point where you get an advanced tucked front lever and unlock that skill off really comfortably, you are setting yourself up, absolutely setting yourself up. And what I want you guys to focus on doing is getting into a tucked position, holding that. And if you're quite comfortable with that for about 5 to 10 seconds, start to curl your feet down and knees forward. If you can get into that 90-degree position in terms of my knees being well over my hips and feet where my hips are as well, and hold that for like 4 or 5 seconds, you're absolutely flying. And it's a great way to build up the lat strength, the core and hip flexor strength, and just that overall straight arm pulling strength, which is so important in calisthenics. So now probably I would argue maybe the most difficult one here is the opposite of what we just learned there. So that was a straight arm pulling exercise. What I think is super important is to build a straight arm pushing exercise. So obviously we've learned that pushing mechanics, and we've also learned the pulling mechanics now. And I think this also sets the tone now to learn the final skill here, which is a tuck planche. You do not need parallettes. I'm only doing it because I'm on the beach. It's gonna be a little bit weird. If you are using it off your hands, making sure you're doing it like that. So the exact same position in terms of your planche leans. But in terms of the actual position, if you do happen to use parallettes, the width is from your finger to your elbow. And that's a pretty much industry competition standard that a lot of people abide by. So that's something you can focus on doing. And it's the same with your hands as well, exact same position. So from here, all you want to focus on doing is obviously lifting up as high as you possibly can and keeping that same cueing and internal cueing that we spoke about. Squeezing the collarbones, inverting your chest bone, and just imagine you're trying to get yourself and your torso as high as possible and lifting up as high as you can. Straight elbows, hips in line with shoulders, and holding that position. So incredibly important. Obviously, a very tough exercise, and it takes time to progress to. What you can use is a band to help you progress, or for a lot of you, it's very easy to just simply do leg assisted, driving your knees into your chest with the legs on the floor, leg one, leg off, and then eventually get into a point where obviously you can do it with both legs off. If you can hold a good tuck planche for 4 or 5 seconds, you are absolutely flying. So guys, that's the 10 skills. Regardless, the most important thing is going through it in your own time and making sure you're continuing to still build your overall strength, conditioning, and foundation with a typical program in terms of just the key movement patterns, like, as I've said, pull-ups, push-ups, rows, dips, and harder variations around that. If you tick off all those 10 skills, you are well and truly on your way to intermediate and advanced level calisthenics, and you've built up all of the key movement patterns to set yourself up. Like, subscribe, jump in my calisthenics community. There's programs, coaching support there, community support also. The team is absolutely thriving, and I'll see you guys in the next one.